Captain Li Wu walked slowly through the massive silver doors of the Galactic Council chamber. His boots made soft clicking sounds on the crystal floor that stretched out like a frozen ocean beneath his feet. The chamber was so huge that he could barely see the far walls, and the ceiling disappeared into darkness above him. This was the most important building in the entire galaxy, where decisions were made that affected billions of lives across thousands of worlds. Around him sat the most powerful beings in known space. The Vorthak looked like giant octopuses with metal tentacles that sparked with electricity. Their ships could destroy entire planets, and their technology was thousands of years ahead of anything humans had ever built. The Rixen were like massive insects with shiny black shells and compound eyes that never seemed to blink. They shared one mind across their entire species and could think faster than any computer humans had ever made. The Luminar were the strangest of all. They had no solid bodies at all, just floating balls of pure light that pulsed with different colors. When they spoke, Captain Li had been chosen to represent all of humanity. In this moment, he was 50 years old with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much of space. He had spent his whole life dreaming of this day, when humans would finally be accepted into the galactic community. But as he looked around at the alien faces staring down at him, he began to wonder if this dream was about to become a nightmare. Behind him stood the rest of the human delegation. Engineer Park Hannah was the smartest person he had ever met. She had designed the engines that brought them here, and her mind worked like a perfect machine. Dr. Kim Tae was their chief scientist, who had spent 20 years studying alien cultures and preparing detailed plans for how humans and aliens could work together. Ambassador Song Min had learned 17 different alien languages and had spent years trying to build friendships with other species. They had all worked so hard for this moment. Humanity had been trying to join the Galactic Council for 50 long years. They had sent gifts of art and music that showed the beauty of human culture. They had shared their scientific discoveries freely with any alien species that asked. They had opened their borders to alien visitors and traders, even when some humans were scared of the strange beings from other worlds. When natural disasters struck alien planets, humans had sent help without being asked and without wanting anything in return. Council Speaker Thexrel floated in the center of the chamber like a miniature sun. His light was so bright that Captain Li had to squint to look at him directly. The ancient being had lived for over 10,000 years and had seen countless species rise and fall across the galaxy. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. The judgment had already been decided. Captain Li could see it in the way the alien delegates looked at the human group. Some seemed bored, as if they were wasting their time on something unimportant. Others looked amused, like they were watching children play at being adults. A few seemed genuinely sorry, but they said nothing to help Speaker Thexrel began to list all the reasons why humanity was not ready to join the galactic community. Human military forces were laughably weak compared to the great war fleets that patrolled space. Human technology was primitive and clumsy compared to the elegant systems used by advanced species. Human philosophy was shallow and meaningless compared to the deep wisdom that came from millions of years of civilization. The worst part was not the rejection itself, but the way they delivered it. Some of the alien delegates actually laughed when Speaker Thexrel mentioned human attempts at space travel. They giggled like schoolchildren when he described human ships as slow and unreliable. The Vorthak military commander made a joke about how human weapons could not even scratch the paint on his smallest warship. Engineer Park Hannah felt her hands form into fists as she listened to them mock everything humans had worked so hard to achieve. She thought about the brave astronauts who had died exploring space, the brilliant scientists who had given their lives to advance human knowledge, and the ordinary people who had sacrificed so much to fund the space program that brought them here. All of that sacrifice was being dismissed as worthless by beings who had never known what it meant to struggle for every small step forward. Dr. Kim Tae watched silently as his life work was thrown away like garbage. He had written thousands of pages describing how human and alien cultures could learn from each other. He had identified hundreds of ways that cooperation could benefit everyone. He had dreamed of seeing human children and alien children playing together, learning from each other and building a better future for the galaxy. But none of the council members had even bothered to read his proposals. The final insult came when Speaker Thexrel suggested that maybe in another few thousand years, when humanity had grown up a little, they might be worth reconsidering. The implication was clear: humans were like cosmic toddlers who needed to sit at the kids' table, while the adults made the real decisions. The fact that humans had feelings and emotions was seen as a weakness that made them unfit for serious galactic politics. Captain Lee felt something change inside him as he listened to the judgment. It was not just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was something deeper and more dangerous. It was the moment when someone who has been trying desperately to fit in suddenly realizes that they do not want to be part of this group after all. When Speaker Thexrel finished his long speech about human inadequacy, he asked if the human delegation had anything to say in response. Captain Lee stood up slowly and looked around the chamber at all the alien faces. He thought about all the years of preparation, all the hope and dreams that had brought them here, and all the humiliation they had just endured. His response was simple and dignified. "Thank you for your time," he said. "We understand your decision. We will not trouble you again." The aliens seemed surprised by how calmly the humans accepted their rejection. They had expected arguing or begging, or at least some kind of emotional outburst, but Captain Lee just nodded, politely gathered his team, and walked toward the Exitaz. They left the chamber. Engineer Park Hannah whispered that she was sorry it had ended this way, but Captain Lee surprised her by saying he was not sorry at all. This rejection had freed them from any obligation to prove themselves to beings who would never respect them. Now humanity could find its own path among the stars without worrying about what these ancient species thought. Dr. Kimte realized that this was not really an ending, but a beginning. The galaxy had made its choice, and now humans would make theirs. They would take their emotions and creativity and stubborn refusal to give up, and they would build something better than anything the Galactic Council had ever imagined. The rejection hurt more than any of them wanted to admit, but it also lit a fire in their hearts that would burn for decades to come. As they walked back to their small transport ship, Captain Lee made a promise to himself and to all of humanity. They would show the galaxy what humans were really capable of, and when they did, the Galactic Council would regret this day for the rest of their very long lives. 5 years had passed since the Galactic Council had crushed humanity's dreams in their crystal chamber. Ambassador Song Min stood in her office looking out at the stars through a massive window that showed the endless darkness of space. She had been the last human diplomat trying to keep some kind of relationship with the alien species, but even she was giving up now. The order had come from Earth just yesterday. All humans were to return home immediately. Every trading post, every research station, every small colony that had been built in council space was to be abandoned. The withdrawal was not angry or dramatic. It was quiet and thorough, like a tide slowly pulling back from the shore. Dr. Yun-Su sat in the deep space monitoring center on Luna, watching the final human ships disappear from his screens one by one for 30 years. He had tracked human expansion into the galaxy, watching proudly as his species spread among the stars. Now he was watching them all come home, and it broke his heart. The Bright Hope trading station near Vorthok space had been humanity's proudest achievement. It was a beautiful structure made of Earth steel and alien crystal where humans and aliens had worked together for the first time. The station had processed millions of tons of cargo and had been home to over 10,000 people. Now it was empty. Captain Cho Hyo had been the last person to leave, turning off the lights and sealing the airlocks before heading back to human space. On the research moon of Kepler-7, Dr. Lisa Chun had spent 8 years studying alien plant life that could revolutionize human medicine. Her work could have saved millions of lives, but she packed up her laboratory without complaint. When the Rixon scientists asked why she was leaving, she simply smiled and said that humans were no longer welcome here. The withdrawal puzzled many of the alien species. The younger ones especially could not understand why the humans were leaving so completely. Some of the Rixon workers had become friends with human engineers and were sad to see them go. A few luminar philosophers had enjoyed debating human ideas about art and beauty. They tried to convince their human friends to stay, but the humans politely refused. Commander Zethlik of the Vorthek military was pleased to see the humans go. He had always thought they were troublemakers who asked too many questions and did not show proper respect to their betters. He told his officers that this proved humans were cowards who ran away when things got difficult, but some of his younger officers were not so sure. They remembered how bravely human rescue teams had worked during the Great Solar Storm of 2387 when Vorthok ships had been stranded in dangerous space. The Rixon Hive Queens calculated that losing human trade would reduce galactic economic efficiency by only 3%. They decided this was an acceptable loss for maintaining proper order, but they were wrong. About the numbers, humans had been involved in far more trade than anyone realized. They had been the middlemen for dozens of smaller species who were too afraid or too poor to deal directly with the major powers. As human ships vanished from the trade routes, strange gaps began to appear in the galactic economy. Certain rare minerals that humans had been quietly mining became suddenly scarce. Some of the most popular entertainment programs had been produced by human artists, and now they were gone forever. Several important trade agreements had been negotiated by human diplomats who understood both sides better than anyone else. The alien species who had worked closely with humans began to feel their absence most keenly. The Borith nomads had relied on human navigators to guide them through dangerous space regions. The Kethma repair crews had learned advanced engineering techniques from human mechanics. The Ilani artists had been inspired by human creativity to produce their most beautiful works, but the most troubling sign was the silence itself. Human space had become completely quiet. No radio signals, no ship transponders, no diplomatic messages. Human colonies that had once welcomed alien visitors now had automated defense systems that politely but firmly told aliens to stay away. The few alien ships that tried to enter human territory found empty space where bustling colonies had once been. Captain Cho Hyo knew something the aliens did not understand. This was not a retreat, this was preparation. While the galaxy saw empty space and assumed humans had given up, he knew that deeper in human territory massive construction projects were beginning. Shipyards were being built on hidden worlds. Training academies were being established in systems the aliens had never explored. The humans were not running away, they were regrouping. They were taking all the knowledge they had gained about alien technology and combining it with their own innovations. They were learning from their mistakes and preparing for something bigger than anyone imagined. Dr. Yoon Soo received regular reports from the outer colonies about the construction projects. He saw the resource allocations for new research facilities and the recruitment drives for expanded military forces. The humans were building something unprecedented in galactic history, a completely independent civilization that owed nothing to the established powers. Ambassador Song Min packed the last of her personal belongings into storage containers. She had spent 15 years trying to build bridges between humans and aliens, but those bridges had been burned by alien arrogance. Now she was going home to help plan something entirely different. Instead of asking for permission to join the galactic community, humans were going to build their own. The final human ship left Council Space on a Tuesday morning. Captain Park Dahl looked back at the stars that had once seemed so welcoming and now felt cold and hostile. He thought about all the human dreams that had been crushed by alien prejudice, but he also thought about the new dreams that were being born in the darkness of human space. The galaxy barely noticed when the last human disappeared from their sensors. Most aliens went back to their normal lives, assuming that the brief human experiment was over, but a few observant beings wondered what the humans were planning in their silence. A few wise aliens worried that the galaxy might have made a terrible mistake in the depths of space. Far from any alien sensors, human engineers were already at work on projects that would change everything. They were building ships that could travel faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were developing weapons that could disable enemies without killing them. And most importantly, they were creating a new kind of society based on cooperation rather than domination. The aliens had rejected humanity because they thought humans were too emotional, too chaotic, too different. But those same qualities were about to become humanity's greatest strengths. The galaxy had chosen order over innovation, tradition over progress, and fear over hope. Now they would have to live with the consequences of that choice. As the last human signals faded from galactic communications networks, the real work began. Humanity had learned valuable lessons about the galaxy's true nature, and now they would use that knowledge to build something better, the silence. From human space was not empty, it was full of potential and preparation for what was coming next. 20 years had passed since the Great Silence began, and the galaxy was starting to notice strange things happening in the empty spaces between stars. Trade ships reported massive energy readings from the direction of human space, but when investigation fleets arrived, they found nothing but cosmic dust and distant starlight. The readings were always dismissed as equipment failures or natural phenomena, but they kept happening. Colonel Zhang Bio floated in the command center of the Shadow Walker 1. Of humanity's newest deep space reconnaissance vessels, the ship was completely invisible to alien sensors using technology that had been developed during the long years of isolation. He watched through advanced viewing screens as a Vorthak war fleet conducted training exercises in what they thought was empty space. The aliens had no idea they were being observed. The human ship could have destroyed their entire fleet without them ever knowing what hit them, but that was not the mission. Colonel Zhang was gathering intelligence, studying alien weaknesses, and learning how the galaxy's military forces operated. His findings would be disturbing to any alien commander. Human technology had evolved rapidly during their isolation. The rejection by the Galactic Council had lit a fire under human scientists and engineers who were determined to prove that their species deserved respect. They had taken alien technology that they had observed and improved it in ways the original creators never imagined. The stealth systems that hid the Shadow Walker were based on luminar energy manipulation techniques, but humans had made them work with solid matter instead of just light. The weapon systems combined Vorthak power generation with Rixon computational targeting, but added human creativity to make them more versatile. The propulsion system used principles from all the major alien technologies, but powered by human fusion reactors that were more efficient than anything the galaxy had ever seen. But the most important advance was not technological. It was social. Human space had become unified in a way that alien civilizations could never match. The Vorthak were divided into competing military factions. The Rixon Hive Queens often disagreed with each other about major decisions. The Luminars spent centuries debating philosophy while real problems went unsolved. Humans had learned to work together in ways that amazed even themselves. The rejection by the Galactic Council had given them a common enemy and a shared purpose. Every human settlement, every research station, every military base was working toward the same goal, proving that humanity deserved to stand among the stars as equals to any species. The first signs of trouble in the established galactic order appeared as small incidents that seemed unrelated. Vorthak colonies on the outer rim began reporting equipment failures and communication breakdowns. Rixon Hive Queens lost contact with some of their subsidiary hives for days at a time. Luminar philosophical debates were being disrupted by new ideas that challenged their ancient beliefs. Admiral Na Young commanded the growing human fleet from her flagship, the New Earth, a massive vessel that was larger than anything the aliens had ever built. She received regular reports from human agents who had remained in galactic society after the Great Withdrawal. These brave volunteers had spent decades building networks of contacts among younger, more progressive members of various alien species. The reports were encouraging. The younger generation of aliens was asking uncomfortable questions about why their leaders had rejected humanity so harshly. They wondered if the ancient council members were too set in their ways to recognize genuine progress when they saw it. Some were even beginning to secretly study human culture and philosophy. Meanwhile, human territory had expanded far beyond what the Galactic Council imagined possible, using routes through dangerous nebulae and unstable space regions that alien ships could not navigate. Humans had discovered dozens of new worlds, rich in resources and perfect for colonization. They had also encountered other species that the Council had either ignored or could not reach. The Zephyrians were a peaceful species of flying creatures who lived on gas giant moons. They had been trying to contact the Galactic Council for centuries, but their messages had been ignored because their technology was considered too primitive. The Rocklings were silicon-based life forms who lived in asteroid belts and had developed unique mining techniques that could extract resources from the most difficult locations. These species welcomed human contact with enthusiasm. They had been waiting for someone to treat them as equals rather than curiosities or resources to be exploited. Human diplomats like Ambassador Li Sun worked tirelessly to build relationships based on mutual respect and shared benefit rather than domination and exploitation. The Free Alliance, as it came to be known, operated on principles that were completely different from the Galactic Council. Instead of a rigid hierarchy where older species commanded younger ones, every member had an equal voice in decision-making. Instead of hoarding technology and knowledge, everything was shared freely among allies. Instead of using military force to maintain order, conflicts were resolved through negotiation and compromise. Captain Kim Woo led exploration missions into the far reaches of space where no alien had ever traveled. His ships discovered ancient ruins left by civilizations that had vanished millions of years ago. Some of these ruins contained technology that was even more advanced than anything the current galactic powers possessed, but instead of keeping these discoveries, secret humans shared them with their allies. The growing network of human allies began to affect galactic politics in subtle but important ways. Trade routes that had operated for millennia were being bypassed by new paths that somehow avoided council monitoring systems. Young beings from across the galaxy were disappearing from their homeworlds, only to be spotted later on ships heading toward the unknown regions of space. Most disturbing of all, the absolute authority of the Galactic Council was being questioned openly for the first time in thousands of years. Junior officers in alien military forces were asking why they followed orders from commanders who had never proven themselves in real combat. Young scientists were wondering why they accepted theories from professors who had not discovered anything new in centuries. General Parkdal smiled grimly as he read the latest intelligence reports from his office deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid. The Council had rejected humanity because they feared change, but change was happening whether they wanted it or not. The galaxy's rigid order was cracking under pressure from new ideas and new possibilities. The humans had spent 20 years in silence, learning and growing and preparing. Now, they were ready to show the galaxy what they had accomplished. The council members who had laughed at human primitiveness were about to discover that they had made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The storm was coming, and it would reshape the galaxy forever. The only question was whether the established powers would adapt to the changing times or be swept away by forces they could no longer control. Captain Lim Su was having the worst day of his life, and that was saying something considering he had survived 3 asteroid storms and a black hole encounter in the past year. His exploration ship, the Star Dancer, was limping through the void, reaches a region of space that the Galactic Council had marked as too dangerous for civilized beings to explore. The ship's engines were making concerning noises, and half his instruments were showing error messages. The distress signal came through the static like a voice calling for help in a thunderstorm. It was weak and broken, but clearly artificial. Someone was in serious trouble out here in the cosmic wasteland. Captain Lim did not hesitate for even a second. He ordered his crew to change course and head toward the signal at maximum speed. What they found floating in the darkness was a ship unlike anything in human databases. It was long and sleek, with a crystalline hull that caught starlight like a prism. The vessel was clearly damaged, with hull breaches and dead engines, but it was still intact enough to support life. Captain Lim opened communication channels and was surprised to hear a translator working on the alien language. The beings inside the damaged ship were called Kethmar, and they were reptilian creatures with scales that shifted color based on their emotions. Right now, those scales were showing the deep blue of desperation and fear. Their ship had been attacked by Vorthek raiders who had mistaken them for pirates. The Kethmar had been trying to reach a safe port when their engines failed, leaving them stranded in this dangerous region. Any Galactic Council ship would have followed standard protocol, report the incident to Vorthek authorities, and continue on their mission. The Kethmar were not council members, so their problems were not the council's responsibility. But Captain Lim was human, and humans had different ideas about responsibility. The rescue operation took 6 hours. Human engineers worked alongside Kethmar technicians to repair the damaged systems while medical teams treated the injured aliens. Captain Lim learned that the Kethmar had been enslaved by the Vorthek Empire for over a century. They were considered a servant species, whose only purpose was to provide labor and resources for their masters. When the Kethmer ship was finally repaired and ready to travel, their captain Sektor asked Captain Lim why humans had helped them. The question seemed to puzzle him, as if he could not understand why anyone would risk their own safety for strangers. Captain Lim's answer was simple: because it was the right thing to do. This single act of compassion created ripples that spread throughout the galaxy's underground networks. The Kethmer spoke of the humans with wonder and gratitude, telling anyone who would listen about the strange aliens who had saved their lives without asking for anything in return. The story reached other oppressed species who had been ground down by centuries of council neglect. The Ilani were crystal singers, whose music could literally reshape matter, but the council had stripped them of voting rights after they disagreed with a major policy decision. The Borith were nomadic traders whose knowledge of secret space routes was unmatched, but their requests for territorial recognition had been ignored for decades. The Zenthri were master biologists who could heal almost any disease, but they were forbidden from sharing their knowledge. Because they were not council members, one by one these forgotten species began making contact with human outposts. They sent careful messages through hidden communication networks asking if the stories about human kindness were really true. Human diplomats like Dr. Shin-A responded with enthusiasm, welcoming these new contacts and offering friendship without conditions. Dr. Shin-A had been appointed as humanity's first ambassador to non-council species, a job that did not officially exist. Because the council pretended these species did not matter, she traveled to hidden worlds and secret space stations, meeting with representatives of dozens of different cultures that had been pushed to the margins of galactic society. The first formal meeting of what would become the Free Alliance took place on a small moon in neutral space. Representatives from 15 different species gathered in a simple dome structure that had been built specifically for this purpose. The meeting had no fancy protocols or ancient ceremonies. It was just being sitting around a table, talking about how to make life better for everyone. And like the rigid hierarchy of the Galactic Council, where older species commanded younger ones, every member of the Free Alliance had an equal voice. The Kethmer engineering expertise was just as valuable as human leadership skills. The Ilani artistic vision was just as important as Borith navigation knowledge. Each species contributed their unique strengths to the common good. Captain Kim So led the first joint exploration mission, combining human ships with vessels from 6 different Alliance species. The fleet discovered a cluster of habitable worlds that had been overlooked by council surveys. The planets were rich in rare minerals and perfect for colonization, but instead of claiming them for humanity, the Alliance decided to share them equally among all members. The news of these discoveries sent shockwaves through the established galactic order. Council intelligence agencies struggled to understand how primitive species were finding resources that their advanced surveys had missed. The answer was simple: cooperation worked better than competition. Different species, looking at the same problems from different perspectives, found solutions that no single culture could achieve alone. General Li Jun commanded the Alliance's growing military forces, which operated on principles completely different from council armies. Instead of conquest and domination, Alliance forces focused on defense and peacekeeping. They protected trade routes from pirates, helped evacuate civilians from natural disasters, and provided security for colonies that could not defend themselves. The most remarkable thing about the Alliance military was how well different species worked together. Human tactical flexibility combined perfectly with Kethmer engineering skills. Ilani creativity enhanced Borith strategic thinking. Zenthri biological knowledge made medical care more effective for all species. These combinations produced results that amazed even the participants. Young beings from across the galaxy began to hear stories about this new alliance where species worked together as equals instead of servants and masters. Some of them made dangerous journeys to reach Alliance territory, abandoning comfortable lives in council space for the chance to be part of something better. The council's response was predictable. They dismissed the Alliance as a temporary rebellion that would collapse once the species involved realized they needed proper leadership. But the council fundamentally misunderstood what was happening. This was not a rebellion against authority. It was the creation of a new kind of authority based on consent rather than force ambassador song. Ho reported to Alliance leadership that more species were requesting membership every month. Many of them were council members, who were tired of being ignored by the major powers. The Alliance was growing faster than anyone had expected, and its influence was spreading into regions that the Council considered secure. The transformation was happening at every level of society. Young aliens were questioning why their parents accepted second-class status in their own societies. Scientists were wondering why they shared their discoveries with species who gave nothing in return. Artists were asking why they created beauty for beings who did not appreciate their work. Captain Lim Su often thought about that first rescue mission in the void reaches and how it had changed everything. He had simply done what felt right at the time, but that simple act of kindness had started something that was reshaping the galaxy. The Council had taught the galaxy that power came from dominance and fear, but humans and their allies were proving that true power came from cooperation and mutual respect. The Free Alliance was no longer just a group of forgotten species trying to survive. It was becoming a real alternative to the Galactic Council's ancient order, and unlike the Council, which ruled through tradition and intimidation, the Alliance was held together by something much stronger: the genuine desire of free beings to work together for a better future. Council Emergency Session Leader Vexler had lived for over 8,000 years and had never seen anything like this. In all his centuries of existence, the Galactic Council had been the unquestioned authority in their corner of the universe. Wars had been fought, civilizations had risen and fallen, but the Council had remained constant and eternal. Now, for the first time in galactic history, their absolute power was being challenged. The crisis had begun with what the Council called the Great Silence. Within a single month, 12 major member species had lost contact with significant portions of their territories. Entire sectors that had been peaceful for centuries were reporting unknown ships using impossible technology. Trade routes that had operated for millennia had suddenly become empty, as if someone had erased them. From space, the emergency session chamber buzzed with panic as representatives from across the galaxy tried to understand what was happening to their carefully ordered universe. Military commanders reported that their fleets were being outmaneuvered by ships that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Scientists claimed that the unknown forces were using technology that violated known laws of physics. Economists warned that the galactic economy was starting to collapse as trade networks fell apart. Intelligence reports spoke of a mysterious organization called the Free Alliance that seemed to operate completely outside Council authority. The Alliance controlled territory larger than some of the major Council powers, but their exact borders remained unknown. Their ships could travel through regions that Council vessels could not navigate. Their technology was somehow both familiar and completely revolutionary. Most disturbing of all, young citizens from across the galaxy were vanishing in unprecedented numbers. They left behind messages about joining the future or finding freedom among the stars. Some disappeared from military academies, others from research institutes, and still others from positions of responsibility in government and business. The loss of so many bright young minds was crippling Council society. Junior Analyst Quindal was one of the few beings in the chamber who understood what was really happening. She was a young Luminor who had studied human culture during their brief diplomatic presence decades ago, while her elders debated impossible theories about unknown alien invasions. She quietly reviewed the timeline and found a pattern that made her energy form flicker with realization. The problems had begun exactly 25 years after humanity had been rejected by the Council. The tactics being used by the mysterious alliance showed distinctly human characteristics: unpredictable creativity, emotional decision making, and most troubling of all, the ability to inspire fierce loyalty among diverse species. The alliance was not led by unknown aliens. It was commanded by the very species the Council had dismissed as primitive and unworthy. When Quindal presented her analysis to the emergency session, the reaction was immediate and terrifying. Panic spread through the chamber as ancient beings who had ruled for millennia suddenly realized that their greatest mistake had come back to haunt them. The humans they had laughed at and rejected had spent 3 decades building something vast and powerful in the darkness between stars. Military commander Zethlik of the Vorthek refused to believe that primitive humans could threaten his mighty empire. He ordered a full battle fleet to investigate human space and show these upstart aliens their proper place. The fleet consisted of 50 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, each one capable of destroying entire planets. Their mission was simple: find the humans and remind them why they had been rejected. Fleet never came back 3 days after entering what intelligence claimed was human territory. All communication with the battle fleet ceased, or rescue missions found nothing but empty space, where 50 mighty warships had disappeared without even sending a distress signal. The implications were staggering. If humans could make an entire Vorthek fleet vanish without a trace, then the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted far more than anyone imagined. Adrix and Hive Queen Zentara tried a different approach. She sent diplomatic messages to human space offering to negotiate a peaceful solution to whatever problems existed, but the messages were returned unopened with polite notes explaining that humanity was no longer interested in Council communication. The rejection was courteous but absolutely final. Luminar Council Elder Thexrel, the same being who had delivered the original rejection of humanity, began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. For 3,000 years, he had believed that the Council's ancient wisdom was superior to any younger civilization's innovations. Now he was facing the possibility that the chaotic, emotional humans had built something that surpassed everything the Council had achieved. The evidence was overwhelming. Wherever the Free Alliance operated, prosperity followed. Species that had been struggling under Council rule for centuries were suddenly thriving. Trade flourished between Alliance members while Council commerce stagnated. Young beings across the galaxy were abandoning their homeworlds to join this new civilization that offered opportunity and hope instead of rigid hierarchy and endless tradition. Commander Li Jin monitored Council communications from her stealth ship hidden in the shadows of a distant asteroid. She smiled with grim satisfaction as she listened to the alien leaders, finally beginning to grasp what they had done. The mighty Council that had once looked down on human emotion and chaos was now terrified of the very qualities they had scorned. The Free Alliance now encompassed over 60 species and controlled territory that rivaled the Council's core systems. Human technology had advanced beyond anything the Council possessed. Their society offered freedom and opportunity that the rigid Council hierarchy could never match. Most importantly, they had proven that cooperation was stronger than domination. Desperate to regain some measure of control, the Council began sending diplomatic missions toward human space, but every ship that approached Alliance territory was politely but firmly turned away. The humans and their allies had no interest in negotiating with the beings who had rejected them. The galaxy's power structure had fundamentally changed, and there was no going back. The Council's final desperate act was to offer humanity exactly what they had once wanted: full membership with voting rights, territorial recognition, and a place at the leadership table. The offer came with apologies for past misunderstandings and promises of new cooperation. But the message that came back from human space was devastating in its simplicity: thank you, but we are no longer interested. Those 8 words marked the end of the Galactic Council's absolute authority. For the first time in galactic history, someone had rejected them. The roles had completely reversed. Now it was the Council that was begging for acceptance from a civilization they had once dismissed. Several member species immediately began secret negotiations to join the Free Alliance, tired of the Council's outdated restrictions and fearful of being left behind. Council Elder Vexter stared at the human rejection message and felt something he had not experienced in 8,000 years: fear. The galaxy was changing, whether the Council wanted it to or not. The ancient order that had ruled for millennia was crumbling, and in its place, something new and dynamic was being born. The humans had done the impossible. They had taken rejection and turned it into revolution. They had transformed humiliation into inspiration and had built from nothing a civilization that was surpassing their former tormentors. The Council's regret was genuine and profound, but it had come far too late to matter. As reports continued to arrive of more species joining the Alliance and more Council territory falling under human influence, the ancient beings in the chamber began to realize a terrible truth: they had not just rejected humanity, they had rejected the future itself. and now that future was leaving them behind. Ambassador O-Min stood in the observation deck of New Seoul Station looking out at the most beautiful sight in human space. The massive space city floated in the void like a jewel made of metal and crystal, its lights twinkling like captured stars. Hundreds of ships moved in and out of the station's docking bays, representing dozens of different species that had joined the Free Alliance. In the distance, she could see the construction yards where even larger stations were being built. The message from the Galactic Council lay on her desk, delivered by a nervous Vorthak diplomat who had clearly expected a very different reception. The Council was finally ready to reconsider humanity's application for membership after 30 years of silence. The ancient beings who had once dismissed humans as primitive were now offering everything they had once refused: full voting rights, territorial recognition, and even a seat on the ruling council. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The mighty Galactic Council that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years was now begging for acceptance from the very species they had rejected. Ambassador O had read the message 3 times, and each reading made her smile a little wider. The desperation in the formal language was obvious. Despite the diplomatic politeness, Captain Bang Su entered the observation deck carrying a cup of tea and wearing the relaxed expression of someone who no longer worried about what aliens thought of humanity. He had been promoted to Admiral of the Human Defense Fleet, but still preferred to be called Captain by his friends. As he handed the tea, he gestured toward the view outside where a new ship was arriving from the outer colonies. The vessel was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. It combined human engineering with Kethmer crystal technology, Ilani artistic design, and Borth navigation systems. The result was something that was both beautiful and functional, elegant and powerful. It represented everything the Free Alliance had achieved: cooperation, creating results that no single species could accomplish alone. Admiral Bang reviewed the latest intelligence reports while O composed their response to the Council's offer. The Free Alliance now encompassed over 100 species and controlled nearly half the galaxy's habitable systems. Their technology had advanced beyond anything the Council possessed. Their economy was thriving while Council trade stagnated. Most importantly, their society offered genuine freedom and opportunity to any being willing to work for the common good. The Council's offer was everything humanity had once desperately wanted, but it had come 3 decades too late. When humans had first approached the Council, they had been eager to learn from older, wiser civilizations. They had believed that joining the galactic community would help them become better than they were alone. But the rejection had taught them something more valuable. They were already good enough exactly as they were. Er Hunwo, the Alliance's chief historian, was documenting these events for future generations. She understood that this moment marked a fundamental shift in galactic civilization. For the first time in recorded history, the established order was being challenged not by conquest or revolution, but by the simple act of building something better. The Council had maintained power through tradition and intimidation, but the Alliance was held together by genuine cooperation and mutual respect. The response to the Council's offer was drafted carefully with input from human leaders and representatives from allied species. The message was polite but absolutely clear: humanity appreciated the Council's belated recognition but was no longer interested in joining their organization. The Free Alliance had proven that there was a better way to organize galactic civilization, and they intended to continue building that future. When news of humanity's rejection reached the Council chambers, the reaction was unlike anything in galactic history. For the first time ever, someone had turned down Council membership. Several elder beings who had lived for millennia were so shocked that they went into hibernation cycles to process what had happened. The younger Council members began to panic as they realized their civilization was being left behind by history. The rejection had immediate consequences. Several Council member species began secret negotiations to join the Free Alliance. The Corvan Federation had been a Council member for over 2,000 years, but their young leaders were tired of being ignored by the ancient ruling powers. The telepathic collective had grown frustrated with the Council's inability to understand their unique needs. The Aquatic Worlds Alliance had been seeking greater autonomy for centuries and saw the Free Alliance as their chance for true independence. Within 6 months of humanity's Rejection: nearly 20 council member species had defected to the Alliance. The ancient order that had seemed eternal and unchangeable was collapsing as beings across the galaxy chose freedom over tradition. The Council's rigid hierarchy could not compete with the Alliance's flexible cooperation. Captain Liam Su now commanded the Alliance's exploration fleet, and his ships were discovering new worlds at an unprecedented rate. The galaxy was much larger than the Council had ever imagined, and most of it remained unexplored. Alliance vessels were finding habitable planets, ancient ruins, and even other intelligent species that had developed independently. The universe was full of wonders that the Council's cautious approach had never revealed. The final insult to the Council's pride came when several of their most advanced species formally requested Alliance membership. The crystalline builders, whose technology had created the Council's greatest monuments, decided that human creativity was more valuable than ancient tradition. The Voidwalkers, whose ships could travel between dimensions, were impressed by Alliance innovation. The Timeseers, whose prophetic abilities had guided Council policy for millennia, announced that the future belonged to the Alliance. Admiral Na Young reviewed the strategic situation from her flagship and marveled at how completely the balance of power had shifted. The Alliance military was now larger and more advanced than all Council forces combined, but more importantly, it was unified in ways that Council armies could never match. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now working together as allies, united by shared values rather than forced cooperation. The transformation was happening at every level of society. Young beings throughout the galaxy were abandoning Council worlds to join the Alliance. Artists and scientists were fleeing the rigid hierarchies of their homeworlds for the creative freedom of Alliance space. Even some of the ancient Council elders were quietly expressing interest in joining the new civilization. Dr. Shin now served as the Alliance's chief diplomat, and she received dozens of requests for membership every day. Species that had been ignored by the Council for centuries were finally finding someone who would listen to their concerns. The Alliance's principles were simple. Every being deserved dignity and respect regardless of their species or origin, and cooperation was always better than domination. The Galactic Council's response to their declining power was predictable. They became more rigid and authoritarian, trying to hold on to control through force and tradition, but their efforts only accelerated the exodus. As more species decided they preferred Alliance freedom to Council oppression, the ancient beings who had ruled for millennia were discovering that power based on fear and tradition was ultimately fragile. As the last Council ships departed human space with their rejected offer, Ambassador Min felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey from that humiliating rejection 30 years ago to this moment of triumph had been long and difficult, but humanity had proven something important. They did not need the approval of others to build something great. The galaxy had entered a new age where cooperation was stronger than competition, where diversity was celebrated rather than suppressed, and where the future belonged to those brave enough to embrace change. The Council's regret was genuine and profound, but it had come far too late to matter. The universe was moving forward, and those who could not adapt would be left behind by the tide of history they had tried so hard to resist.